Hello everybody, my name is Gray Ferris and I'm here with Mr. Bruce Washburn, co-founder of Washburn and Dowdy. So, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Okay, so let's start off with, where did you go to school and what did you study? This question is by Bartlett Lockwood.
I went to the University of Michigan, College of Engineering, and studied the naval architecture and marine engineering. Graduated from there in 1974. From there, I went to work at Bath Iron Works for a couple of years.
Great. What prompted you to study?
I always loved boats. Been probably designing boats since I was 10 years old or so. It was sort of a natural to me. I was probably the only one in my family who knew exactly what he wanted to do when he went to college.
Okay. And what is the story of the founding of Washburn and Dowdy?
Washburn Dowdy. In 1977, Bruce Dowdy, Carl Pianka, and I decided we wanted to build fishing boats at the time. The 200-mile fishing limits had just gone in, and we thought it would be a surge in building of fishing boats. Bruce Dowdy worked at Bath Iron Works with me. Carl Pianka was an electrician, master electrician, working for the telephone company. We tried a bit to sell ourselves to a couple of fishermen, and we weren't getting too far, so we decided we would build a boat on our own. So I designed a 70-foot dragger, and we proceeded to build that. It's up on Main Street in Brunswick, about 3 miles from the water. We figured we'd face it, getting it wet when the time came. In the meantime, we were advertising the boat, and a fellow, Dick Goodwin, a fisherman from Rhode Island, came up to look at it, and he liked what he saw, liked the workmanship, but it was smaller than what he wanted, so he pulled out a set of plans and put them across the hood of his truck and said, "This is what I really want." So we came up with a price for him and came to terms with it and started to build an 86-foot dragger, which we realized that one we were going to have to be on the water. We rented a lot down in Woolwich, Maine, right where the Reed construction is right now. So just north of the bridge when you're coming over the Bath Bridge. And from there we were kind of off and running. We did end up selling the other boat. We dragged it down across the bridge and down into that yard to finish it. We signed a contract with this Goodwin for another boat. He wanted a pair of them. And kind of went on from there. The first 8 or 10 boats were all fishing boats, and we diversified a little bit. And then in 1984, we were just leasing that property, which was, lease was going to run out here eventually, and we were talking with the owner about selling it, and he was hemming and hawing, and we finally came with down here. Eddie Gamage owned the shipyard at the time. It was that Gamage and Neil Tillotson, who owns Pearson Yachts, they were 50-50 owners of the shipyard here, and Eddie wanted to retire, so he made us a deal we couldn't refuse.
Right.
So in January of '85, we shifted the facility down here. It was actually 2008. The old facility burned down, and what you see is the new facility that went up after that.
Okay. And is this the only place that you guys build boats, or are there other shipyards?
Well, this is our only shipyard. We do subcontract out some sub-assemblies and building modules to some other companies that will then truck them in. And occasionally you'll see a big hunk of steel rolling down the road coming our way. Just like last Friday, one came, part of the pilot house for one of the tugboats came in that way.
Oh, wow. Okay, so how long does it take for you to design a boat? And do you work alone or with a team when you're designing one?
When we started off, I was pretty much working alone. We've since added designers. It varies a lot depending on how complex the boat is, how intricate. But when you design a boat, they have what they call a design spiral, where you sort of start off with the basics and you keep refining it, and you'll do things, and you get into another detail, and you realize something else didn't work, so you're back and rearranging that. It's kind of like when you build a house, if you didn't know where the kitchen was going, so you put a window in that was too low. You got to go back and raise the window up so it's above the countertops.
Okay.
Similar situation.
So always circling back and defining the design.
It keeps refining it. Yeah, you start with trying to figure out how much things are going to weigh. Things like tugboats and fishing boats have a lot of leeway in their weight. Boats that are higher speed, ferry boats, you have to be pretty precise on the weight to know where it's going to float.
Okay. Nat McKenna would like to know if you do certain types of boat construction only during the winter or during the summer, based on conditions.
Not really. I mean, we're pretty. These boats take anywhere from probably 9 months to a year or more to build. So you're working through usually through an entire season, entire year's worth of seasons. It does kind of affect us a little bit if you launch a boat in the middle of the winter. Doing any work on it outside, the outside of the boat is a lot more difficult and could be subject to time delays, and shoveling snow off of it, melting snow off.
Nat would also like to know if there are any factors that affect the type of boats that you've built over the years.
I guess I would say it's the market, what people are looking to build. When we started, as I said before, it's been mostly fishing boats being built, but I think our hull number 10 was actually a 43-foot barge for Chebeague Island that they used to bring trucks over to the island. Went back onto fishing boats and some offshore lobster boats. We did a couple of sailing windjammers, did day trips. We done quite a few ferry boats, car ferries, passenger ferries, casino boats. We did one yacht.
Could you talk a little bit more about the yacht?
Sure. Yeah, the design was based on one of the draggers we did. Actually, one of them used to be right down in Booth Bay here. It was the Elizabeth. This one we made a lot of modifications. It was a trawler yacht, expedition yacht type of 72 feet long, and he had ideas of cruising all over the world with it. It had about a 6,000 mile range, so he could cover quite a distance. It was an interesting boat. We had things like he wanted an emergency take-home power, so I had to design some way to use his generator to drive his propeller. It was an interesting project, and actually worked better than we expected.
It's great when things work out like that.
Yeah, it was a nice boat. It was called the Kitty Wake, and I just heard about a year and a half ago that he was selling it. It was back when we built it. It was all 76, I think, but back in the early mid-90s, I guess is what it was. But he was probably in his 80s back then.
Okay. Have all of your designs, or the boats that have been fabricated by Washburn and Dowdy, are they all steel hulls, or have you guys built boats using other materials as well?
The only ones that were not steel hulled were a series of barges we built for the marine spill response, for the oil spill response, and they were a series of small, I think they were 32-foot long aluminum barges. They were designed so they could throw them on a truck and truck them to wherever they needed to be. Beyond that, the hulls have all been steel. We've sometimes had aluminum superstructures on them.
Zuri Smith would love to know what the largest and smallest boats you guys have designed and built.
Well, the smallest would be those barges.
Okay.
If you want to call the barges a boat, we did build a 46 foot, 45, 46 foot utility boat that was for an oil-fired power plant over in Africa, on the west coast of Africa, that it was used to assist the ship, the big tankers, on coming up to the mooring. They had what they call a single point mooring, where they could get on the mooring and connect right to a pipeline that would then pump the oil ashore. And probably the two largest boats we built lengthwise were two ferry boats. One was a 187-foot casino boat,
wow,
and the other was a 186-foot passenger ferry that ran from Hyannis out to Nantucket. Yes, so I guess the other would add, probably those were lengthwise. If you look at the heaviest boats we built a series of tugboats. They call them ATBs, or articulated tug barge units, where they actually physically connect to a barge and push a 450-foot barge. Those boats were over 700 tons without fuel in them, and they carried about 140,000 gallons of fuel.
Wow, that was a heavy boat.
That was a big fuel bill.
Well, actually, speaking of heavy boats, Mariah Smith would like to know if you can tell how low in the water a boat will rest before it actually ever goes into the water.
Yeah, we hope we're close on that. One of the first things, as I said, in that design spiral is coming up with how much the boat's going to weigh. And when you're starting off early in your career, you go into an awful lot of detail because you don't have anything to base your track record on. After a while, you know the hull is going to weigh a certain amount. You can take some shortcuts. But you have to add up all the weights going into the boat, and then you're designing the boat to take that volume, and there's 35 cubic feet and 1 ton of seawater, so you know how much volume you need. But the other tricky part is you also have to get the center of that volume in the right place so that the boat's not trimmed by the stern or trimmed by the bow. If you guess right, you're right on. And
Going back to fishing boats for a moment, what are some of the most important factors when designing a fishing boat? Elijah Smith would like to know.
Well, the first thing you're going to have to do, you get with the owner, and you need to know what kind of fishing they're going to do. Are they doing like offshore lobstering with fixed gear, long lining fish with fixed gear, dragging, towing nets, scalloping? If they're going to be, towing, dragging or scalloping, you need to know how big a gear they're going to tow to know how much power the boat's going to need. You need to know how big a crew they're going to be running. The draggers would usually run 4 or 5 people on them. Scallopers would fish with as many as 12 people on there because they have to shuck all the scallops or get the meats out of the shells. The offshore lobster boats usually carried about 4 people. A lot of times it was because they would be fishing around the clock, so they might have only 1 or 2 people on watch while they're towing their net, but when they hauled it back, everybody had to get out there and pick through all the fish.
So moving on to tugboats, Mariah Smith would like to know how long it takes to build a tugboat.
The actual construction time is usually somewhere 9 months to a year. From the time you sign a contract, a lot of times it's quite a bit longer. One of the big factors is getting some of the equipment. Most of these new tugboats are using Z-drive propulsion units, and there have been times when there's been as much as a 12-month or 18-month lead time just to get those units in. So that kind of affects the overall time and also the sequencing of when you can. Sometimes you have to figure out how late in the game you can put those into the boat.
Are those Z-drives pretty much taking over the tug industry, or do you still have orders for tugboats that don't use that technology?
They are pretty much taking over the docking tug industry, yes. These ATBs, pushing barges around, it's not so much. Those boats that we built were conventional propulsion systems, a pair of big engines and we had 115-inch propellers, I think, on those.
Wow.
The docking tugs, the maneuverability is more critical to them, so the maneuverability with the Z-drives is just kind of almost do whatever you want with them. It's amazing.
Jackie Branch would like to know how many people work on board a tugboat at one time.
Yeah. The docking tugs, which is kind of most of what we've built, they generally go out with 4 people on board. They'll have a captain, a first mate, an engineer, and a deckhand. And they'll actually work in shifts because they'll live on the boat for usually up to 2 weeks usually. And they'll come in and another crew will come on and take the boat out to keep it going. When they're actually working, they'll be the person steering the boat, captain and the first mate, and then the deckhand and the engineer. Their biggest job is to pass a line up onto the ship and then go back in and get a cup of coffee. So they work the boat with 2 people, but they'll have 4 people on board generally.
How long are they staying on board?
Up to 2 weeks, usually, depending on the harbor they work in. Some harbors are, I think, goes down to the boat down in Savannah, and I think the first thing they do is they put the shore power core to shore, and then they run off to dinner and,
Yeah,
come back and do the night jobs.
a little bit cushier.
Yeah.
Okay. And Jackie has one more question, which is, which boat project has had the most people working on it of Washburn and Doughty projects?
The number of people will vary with the phase of the boat, what's going on. If you look at overall, those ATB tugs we built had somewhere around 100,000 man hours in them, or maybe a little bit more. So, they probably at any one time had more people on it than some of the others. Although some of the ferry boats, as long as they are, you can get more people on it.
Facility here is large enough to accommodate all those boats inside of it?
We can build up to about 185 feet in here. The old building was just a little bit longer, but coming up with our where we had for setbacks and everything when we put the new building up, we were shortened up a little bit. But we're able to get better crane service to it. So we can do about 185 feet, and we have 2 building bays in there. Each one's about 65 feet wide, and the doors are 45 feet wide. So the old building we had, it was 44 feet between the crane beams in one side and 32 feet on the other side.
A bit more spacious.
Yeah, when you build 32-foot wide boats, that was really tight.
I can imagine. So how has technology changed the industry?
Since we started, quite a bit. When we started, design-wise, we were starting with a piece of drawing paper and straight edges and curves and battens and ducks to draw the curves. Then when you built it, when you lofted the boat, we rolled out a large sheet of Mylar and drew the boat at 1/8 of the actual size to get all the curves fared. And then you got your magnifying glass out and lifted all the dimensions for it. Now we've kind of gradually went into using CAD, and then some programs came out for actually fairing up lines and lofting the boats on the computer, which helped a lot. And now it's pretty much all done on the computer. So some of the younger designers, I don't think even know how to draw with paper and pencil. So design-wise, that's kind of where we've gone. It's it'll calculate. Programs are going to calculate the center of buoyancy of the boat instead of having to get out with a planimeter and measure the area of each section and do all the math to come up with where the centers were. As far as in the shipyard, when we started, you built a frame, you got down on your hands and knees, and you laid out a tape measure, and you laid out each frame, drew it out on a sheet of steel, and then put the angle bars together. You got the torch out, you cut the floors and all the brackets for it. You cambered the deck beams, which still pretty much camber them the same way. When you went to put the steel plate on, you pulled the plate up, and then you kind of traced the dimension, cut in where along the chines or the keel. So it was all done very much by hand. Now we can actually use the computer to give us the actual shape of a piece of steel as it's wrapped up onto the shell. The burning machine will cut it. We actually, about a year after we bought the facility down here, we put in a burning machine for cutting the steel, and we were actually the first small shipyard in the country that had one.
Really?
The computer programming for it was then pretty crude, but now it just goes from AutoCAD or design, and you just download it right onto the